Choose one as your husband, the chief ordered. The Apache woman immediately pointed at the cowboy. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
The heat of late summer settled over the Colorado-New Mexico border without easing, leaving the air thick and unmoving as the group of captured men was pushed into the Apache camp. The sun had begun its slow drop toward the ridgeline, and its orange glow pressed against the dry ground, highlighting each grain of dust kicked up by boots and hooves. Warriors surrounded the prisoners with calm focus, guiding them forward in a tight formation. No one shouted. No one hurried. Every movement felt intentional, as if the moment had been prepared long before these men ever appeared. John Mercer walked near the center of the group, wrists bound with rough rawhide that scraped new lines into his already scarred skin. His shirt hung open at the shoulder where it had torn during the ambush, and sweat mixed with the dried blood along his jaw. He kept his back straight, forcing his breath to stay even. He knew panic wasted energy, and he couldn't afford that. He had spent most of his life controlling fear, pushing it deep enough that it rarely reached his expression. John's presence differed from the others. Some men stumbled, others looked around frantically, and a few tried to talk their way out of the situation under their breath. He walked as if he had expected trouble. Maybe not this trouble, but something. He had learned years ago that the world did not bend to effort or fairness, and that realization had shaped everything he became. His younger brother's death during a river crossing continued to live in his chest like a weight that never reduced. He blamed himself daily, believing he should have been stronger, quicker, or simply more aware. The guilt hardened his outlook, and he drifted through ranch work in different territories as a way to avoid staying anywhere long enough for people to ask questions. That morning, he had been traveling with a small trading group, hoping to earn a bit of money before heading north. Their mission was simple: deliver goods, trade for supplies, and continue on. They never made it. The ambush came fast, and John had no chance to intervene. Now he stood among strangers whose futures felt just as uncertain. As the prisoners reached the center of the camp, the quiet of the place became more noticeable. Lodges formed a wide circle around an open clearing. Smoke rose from several fires, carrying the scent of cooked meat, juniper branches, and leather. Children peeked out from behind their mothers, watching the unfamiliar men with cautious curiosity. A row of older warriors stood near the perimeter, evaluating each captive with the seriousness of people who had lived through repeated conflicts. John scanned the faces of the tribe, not looking for escape, but trying to understand the situation. His mind moved through possibilities: negotiation, punishment, forced labor, or something else entirely. None of the outcomes he imagined felt predictable. Still, he didn't let uncertainty reach his expression. His heart raced under his calm exterior, but he forced the rhythm to slow. A ripple of attention moved through the crowd as Chaska, the tribal leader, stepped forward. He walked with slow steps, shoulders relaxed, yet his presence commanded the entire clearing. Deep lines marked his face, the kind that came from years of hard decisions and countless responsibilities. The feathers tied into his gray braids shifted slightly with each motion. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly, steady enough that even the wind seemed to hold back to listen. He explained that the captives were taken during a conflict that had reached a tipping point. Their capture was not meant to settle revenge, but to restore balance. One man would be chosen by tradition to bind peace between tribes and outsiders. The choice belonged to his daughter. The man she selected would be brought into her home and protected, not harmed. The rest would be handled according to their involvement in the conflict. The captives reacted instantly. Some tried to look strong. Some begged quietly. One man claimed he knew how to hunt better than any warrior in the camp. Another promised to work without complaint. Their desperation built like a hum across the clearing. John remained silent. He didn't step forward. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. His mission had shifted the moment the rawhide tightened on his wrists. Survival became the only objective, and showing fear would not help him achieve it. Stillness, restraint, and observation had carried him through far worse situations than this. A new movement caught his attention. Taya entered the clearing beside her father. Her long black hair was braided tightly, decorated with beads and feathers that marked her status. Her deerskin dress fit close to her body, with detailed beadwork and fringe that shifted softly when she walked. She carried herself with controlled calm, not with fear or uncertainty. Eyes dark and steady. She looked at each captive as though she were evaluating not only their strength, but the stability of their character. Taya had her own history. She had once been set to marry a young warrior who died during a raid 2 winters earlier. His loss weighed on her and changed the expectations placed upon her. The tribe needed alliances, and tradition required her to choose someone when conflict reached a point where peace demanded it. She did not enter the circle as a passive participant. She came as someone carrying responsibility she neither asked for nor rejected. She moved past the first man without hesitation. He puffed his chest and tried to catch her attention. She did not slow. She passed the next, who cried out that he could build lodges fast and strong. She showed no reaction. She stepped by a third man who whispered hurried promises. She didn't turn her head. Then her attention landed on John. He did not shift his weight or adjust his posture. He did not force confidence, nor did he attempt to hide his exhaustion. His face remained calm, but his eyes revealed something she recognized, someone who had lived through loss without letting it consume him. Someone who wasn't shouting, wasn't bargaining, and wasn't shrinking. She approached him slowly, not with curiosity, but with certainty forming in her steps. John felt a cold shock in his stomach, an instinctive jolt, yet he controlled his breathing. His heart thudded harder than before, but he kept his eyes on hers, trying to understand why she had stopped. Taya studied him closely. She took in the way he stood, the tension in his shoulders, the tired steadiness in his eyes. She examined how he reacted to her presence, noticing the absence of anger or pleading. She lifted her hand and placed it lightly on his forearm. "This one," she said. The murmurs rose around them, spreading across the clearing. Warriors reacted by straightening their stance, and several captives let out sighs, some in relief, others in disbelief. John felt the warmth of her hand linger even after she drew it back. His pulse jumped, not from fear but from the sudden shift in his fate. A warrior stepped behind him and cut the rawhide bindings. The pressure eased, leaving red lines on his skin. He rotated his wrists carefully, feeling the ache set in. Taya turned away from the line and headed toward her lodge without waiting to see whether he followed. Her certainty left him momentarily stunned. John hesitated for only a breath. He wasn't sure what awaited him inside that lodge: safety, obligation, scrutiny, but he understood one thing clearly. Refusing her choice would be dangerous for everyone, especially her. Whoever she chose became part of an agreement larger than either of them. He stepped after her. The camp watched him closely as he walked. Children whispered. Warriors kept a careful eye on his movements. Women studied him with guarded expressions, trying to understand why Taya had chosen him. When he reached the lodge, she lifted the flap and entered. He paused at the doorway, feeling the weight of the coming change settle in his chest. Inside, the light from a small fire cast warm shadows across the hide walls. The air smelled of sage, tanned leather, and cooked corn. He stepped inside. The flap closed behind him, shutting out the camp's noise. For the first time since the ambush, he felt something unfamiliar settle under his ribs, a quiet acknowledgement that whatever future he had left had just begun to shift in a direction he never expected. And Taya, standing across from him with a steady expression, seemed just as aware of how much this choice would change both of their lives. The lodge's interior felt warmer than John expected, the heat from the small fire reaching him in steady pulses. The light revealed the space slowly, a pile of folded blankets in one corner, a low wooden rack holding pottery bowls, and several tools hanging neatly along one wall. Everything had a clear purpose. Nothing was scattered or left without intention. The order of the space contrasted sharply with the chaotic hours that had brought him here. John stood near the entrance, uncertain whether to move. His hands hung loosely at his sides, still tingling from the bindings that had been cut minutes earlier. He kept his breathing controlled as his eyes adjusted to the dim light. Inside the lodge, the noise of the camp muted so completely that he could hear the soft crackle of the fire and the faint rustle of Taya's dress as she moved. Taya crossed the lodge without speaking. She opened a storage basket and took out a clay cup. Her movements were efficient, quiet, and free of hesitation. She filled the cup from a nearby pot of water warmed by the fire. When she turned back to John, she studied him briefly, as if assessing whether he could stand on his own or if exhaustion would pull him down. She stepped closer and held the cup out to him. "Drink," she said. John didn't reach for it immediately. His mind raced through possibilities: ritual, test, simple offering. Yet her expression told him the gesture was practical, not symbolic. He accepted the cup with steady hands and drank slowly. The warm water eased the dryness in his throat, and he felt the tension along his shoulders begin to shift, though he forced himself to remain alert. He handed the cup back to her with a quiet nod. Taya set the cup aside and motioned to a place near the fire. "Sit," he obeyed, lowering himself carefully onto a folded blanket. The warmth from the fire crept through his tired muscles. She sat a short distance away, neither close enough to feel intimate nor far enough to feel wary. She rested her hands on her knees and watched him without discomfort. Her eyes missed nothing. John tried to read her. She didn't carry hostility, but she also didn't show pleasure in her choice. Her calm seemed shaped by duty, shaped by a responsibility she had taken without letting it crush her. He wondered if she regretted choosing him, but found no hint of regret in her face. She broke the quiet first. "You were with traders," she said. "Yes," he replied, keeping his tone steady. "We were heading north. Supplies, tools, small goods." She nodded once. "You fought when they came." He inhaled slowly. "Not well enough." Her gaze held on him for a moment, not judging, simply acknowledging. "They saw no fear. That is why they tied you last." John blinked at that. He had not noticed the order in which the captors had bound the man. Her comment revealed she had been observing since before the selection ceremony. Taya shifted slightly, her braid falling over her shoulder. The others spoke only of saving themselves. "You watched. You measured. You thought before acting." She paused. "Those things matter." John ran a hand across his wrist, feeling the soreness. Thinking didn't stop what happened. "No," she said, "but it shows who you are." He looked down briefly, absorbing the weight of her words. He didn't know what she expected from him. He didn't know what she needed. Survival was one thing. Understanding this new arrangement was something else entirely. She continued, "My father chose this way to end fighting. A man for my home means a bridge between people. It is not a small thing. I choose who lives here. I choose who sits by this fire." John studied her face more closely. Taya spoke firmly, but he sensed a quiet fatigue beneath her composure. The decision to choose a man had not been hers alone. It had been shaped by loss, by expectation, and by pressure from those who depended on her. She needed someone who wouldn't unravel under responsibility. Whether he wanted it or not, he had been selected because he didn't break. He cleared his throat. "I don't know what you expect me to do." "You learn," she answered. "You work. You follow rules. You stay calm. That is enough for now." He nodded slowly. "And the others?" "They will be judged by their actions," she said without hesitation. "Their futures are not your burden." He accepted that statement in silence. A shift of movement outside the lodge caught Taya's attention. She turned her head slightly, listening. The soft crunch of footsteps passed, likely a warrior checking on the new arrangement. John's muscles tightened, but Taya lifted her hand lightly, signaling him to stay seated. "They will watch you," she said, "not to harm you, to learn if my choice is sound." John exhaled, steadying himself. "And you? Do you think it was?" Her eyes held his for a long moment. "I chose the man who did not shout, who did not lie, who did not collapse." She paused, her voice level but sincere. "I chose the man who seemed ready to face whatever stood in front of him." The statement struck him with unexpected weight. After years of drifting, hearing someone speak about him with that kind of clarity unsettled him more than being tied and dragged into a camp. He didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. Taya stood and placed another blanket near the fire. You rest here tonight. Tomorrow you meet the others. There's work to do. John watched her move, noticing how each action she took carried a steady confidence. He had known many people who acted brave. She acted certain. That difference settled something in his chest he hadn't expected. He lowered himself onto the blanket she provided. The fire's glow softened, casting warm light across the lodge walls. Taya sat near the entrance, her posture straight, as if keeping watch. For the first time since the ambush, he felt the edge of immediate danger ease. Not disappear, but ease. He closed his eyes briefly, aware that the path ahead would not resemble anything he had planned. The night felt unfamiliar, but it held a clarity he couldn't deny. He was no longer a captive waiting for punishment. He was a man chosen for reasons he was only beginning to understand. John woke before sunrise, stirred by the faint sound of movement outside the lodge. The fire had burned down to a soft orange glow, its warmth fading but still enough to illuminate the space around him. Taya sat near the entrance, her back straight, her legs folded beneath her, awake and alert. She had not slept long, if at all. Her posture suggested she expected the day to start with questions. Questions from her people, questions from the man she had chosen, and questions from warriors who wanted to judge whether he deserved to remain. John pushed himself upright slowly. His muscles ached from yesterday's march, but he ignored the soreness. He brushed dust from his shirt and steadied his breathing. The stillness of the early morning reminded him of the ranch work he used to take on at dawn. Fixing fences, checking stock, or saddling horses before the sun rose. Except here, he wasn't free to choose his day. The clarity of purpose was gone, replaced by uncertainty he tried not to show. Taya stood. Her braids slid down her back, and the shifting light caught the colors of the beadwork woven into it. Come, she said, moving the lodge flap aside. He followed her outside. The air was crisp, carrying a clean scent of juniper and damp soil from a night breeze. The camp was waking slowly, women tending small fires, children helping gather wood, young warriors preparing for the day's tasks. Several of them watched John the moment he stepped into view. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to guarded distrust. Taya noticed the looks, but didn't adjust her pace. She walked toward a small fenced area near the edge of camp where several ponies grazed. The fence had broken in one corner, leaving a gap large enough for an animal to slip through. A pile of cracked branches and loose poles lay beside it. You fix this, she said. Show them you work. John stepped closer to inspect the damage. The wood wasn't rotten, but the poles had loosened, likely from a storm or a restless horse pushing against them. He crouched and checked each piece carefully, noting which ones could be reused and which needed replacing. Taya stood a few steps behind him, observing quietly, giving him space to take charge without announcing it. He gathered materials into a small pile. His hands moved with familiar ease, muscle memory guiding him through each step. He braced a post against his shoulder and pushed it deep into the ground, tightening the dirt around its base. His breath came out controlled, not wanting to look winded. He secured a rail next, fitting it into the notch of the upright post before hammering it in place with a stone. The sound echoed across the clearing. A group of young warriors took interest. One leaned forward with crossed arms. Another muttered something, which made two others laugh. Their voices carried the tone of men waiting for a mistake. John ignored them. His attention stayed on the fence. He reinforced the left side and added a new brace for stability. By the time he finished, the structure looked solid again. He stepped back, wiped his hands on his trousers, and inspected the line one last time. Taya approached the fence and ran her hand along the top rail. It holds, she said. A warrior named Maddo, broad-shouldered and not much older than John, approached with a stern expression. He studied the repaired section closely, testing the pressure with one hand. After a moment, he gave a short grunt that sounded more like acknowledgement than approval. He works, Taya said, addressing Maddo directly. Maddo's eyes narrowed. Work is easy. Trust is not. John held Maddo's stare without challenging him. He understood the man's suspicion. A stranger chosen to stand in a place of importance could unsettle the people who lived here long before he arrived. Taya answered with a calm tone. He learns today, more tomorrow. Matto stepped back, but didn't leave. His presence remained heavy, his watchfulness unbroken. Taya motioned for John to walk with her to the water basin at the center of camp. As they moved, she kept her stride even, making it clear he should not appear hesitant. Warriors and families turned to look at him, each expression layered with expectation, hesitation, or quiet judgment. John's pulse picked up, but he kept his posture steady. He reminded himself that panic solved nothing. If he wanted to survive here, he had to understand these people, their routines, their rules. He had to respect what mattered to them, even if he didn't fully grasp it yet. When they reached the basin, Taya filled 2 small clay cups. She handed one to him. "You did not break," she said simply. "I fixed a fence," John replied. "You faced eyes waiting for you to fail," she said. "That is harder." He didn't respond. Her words struck him with a clarity he didn't want to admit. He had spent years thinking his worth ended the day his brother died. Yet here stood a woman who saw value in how he carried himself in silence. She sipped her water and studied him closely. "My people watch everything. They watched the men taken yesterday. They watched who fought, who hid, who begged. They watched you stand still." John lowered his gaze to the water. "Standing didn't save anyone. It kept you alive," she said. "Now you decide what to do with that." He looked up again. Her expression was steady, free of pity or pressure. She expected him to face his new life without flinching. For the first time since the raid, he felt a faint sense of direction beneath all the uncertainty. Taya set her cup down. "There is more to do," she said. "You meet my father next. He will judge your place here." John nodded once. His stomach tightened, not from fear of Chaska, but from the weight of what this meeting could shape. He followed Taya across the camp, past curious stares, toward the man whose approval would determine whether John became part of this fragile peace, or whether his stay in the lodge would be his last moment of safety. Taya led John toward a shaded area near the edge of the camp where several elders sat around a low-burning fire. The space was quiet, set apart from the noise of morning chores. Warriors passed through from time to time, but none lingered. It was a place reserved for decisions, for private discussions, and for judgment. John felt the shift immediately. The air carried a sharper focus, a steadier tension. Chaska stood with his hands folded behind his back, watching the flames with a calm that seemed carved from years of carrying responsibility. His gray braids rested over his shoulders, and the lines on his face were deep, marking decades of hardship, leadership, and loss. When he turned to face them, John felt an instinctive urge to straighten his posture. Taya stopped a few paces from her father. "He worked at First Light," she said. "The fence is strong again." Chaska nodded once. His eyes moved to John, studying him from head to toe with slow precision. This was no casual inspection. It was the kind of look a man gave when he needed to decide whether someone was a risk, an asset, or a future problem. John held the elder's gaze without acting defiant. His breath stayed steady. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing on him, but he didn't shift or lower his eyes. Chaska gestured to a wooden stool near the fire. "Sit." John did as instructed. Taya stood beside her father, her presence steady but not protective. She didn't shield John from scrutiny, nor did she distance herself. She simply remained where she belonged, as someone who had made a choice she meant to stand by. Chaska considered him before speaking. "You were taken during conflict with trader routes," he said. "Why were you there?" John answered plainly. "Work. I was helping move goods north. Nothing more." "Not a soldier?" Chaska asked. "No." "Not a scout?" "No." Chaska studied him again, looking for signs of deception. The air around them grew still. John felt the fire's warmth on his legs and kept his expression calm. He knew any hint of dishonesty would turn this conversation against him quickly. Chaska continued. "When you were attacked, you did not shout. You did not try to run." "What?" John hesitated, not wanting to reveal more than necessary, but understanding that withholding too much would look like fear. "I've seen panic ruin men," he said finally. It makes them careless. It gets others killed. I learned to stay still and think. Chaska watched him with sharp attention. Learned from who? John looked at the ground briefly before forcing himself to answer. My brother. I lost him because I reacted too slow. I've spent years trying not to repeat that. Taya's eyes shifted toward John with faint recognition. She hadn't heard this before, but she understood the kind of weight a person carried after losing someone close. Chaska didn't show sympathy. He simply acknowledged the statement with a short nod. Regret shapes people, he said, sometimes into danger, sometimes into steadiness. He paused. Which are you? John met his gaze again. I try to be steady. Trying is not enough, Chaska said. John absorbed that quietly. The elder circled him slowly, evaluating his posture, his hands, the injuries along his arms. He stopped behind John for a moment, saying nothing. John kept his breathing controlled. He wasn't sure what the elder saw or what judgment he was forming, but he resisted the urge to turn his head. When Chaska returned to stand in front of him, he folded his arms. My daughter chose you, he said. Her decision carries weight for all of us. If you fail to respect her choice, or if you bring trouble to this camp, the consequences will be final. John nodded. I understand. You obey our rules, Chaska continued. You learn our ways. You work every day. You answer when called. And you do nothing to stir fear in this place. I can do that, John said. Chaska leaned in slightly. And you do not take advantage of Taya. She gives you shelter, not permission. John felt heat climb up the back of his neck. He shook his head firmly. I'm not here to harm her. Taya remained silent, but her posture eased a little, as if she recognized the honesty in his tone. Two warriors approached the circle quietly. One held a bundle wrapped in hide. The other carried a wooden staff marked with colored carvings. They stood behind Chaska, waiting for instruction. Chaska stepped aside, revealing a large basin filled with water. You will wash, he said. New start requires clean skin. John hesitated for only a moment. The significance was clear. If he washed here, publicly, he would be recognized as someone entering the tribe's daily life, not staying on the edges as a prisoner. He removed his torn coat and stepped toward the basin. Taya watched without embarrassment, her expression focused, as if evaluating how he handled this moment. John cupped water in his hands and ran it over his face, washing away dust, dried sweat, and the last signs of yesterday's struggle. He cleaned his arms, his neck, the blood along his jaw. The cool water grounded him. When he finished, he stepped back. The warrior with the bundle approached and placed it at his feet. John knelt and opened it carefully. Inside were clean pieces of simple clothing, softened leather trousers, a woven shirt, and a belt. These are for work, Chaska said, not ceremony. John picked up the shirt. The fabric felt sturdy but comfortable. He understood what this meant. They expected him to contribute, not linger as a guest. He changed quickly, folding his old shirt and placing it aside. Taya looked him over once, neither pleased nor displeased, just taking in the man she had chosen under new light. Chaska stepped closer again. Today you prove usefulness. Tomorrow you prove intention. Do not mix the two. John nodded. Understood. The elder shifted his attention to Taya. He stays under your roof, Chaska said. Your responsibility. Your decision. Taya bowed her head slightly, accepting the role with quiet certainty. Chaska looked back at John. You're no longer bound, but you're not free. Learn the space between. John absorbed the words with a seriousness that matched the tone. He felt the weight of the new clothes on his shoulders, the cool water drying on his skin, and the eyes of the tribe narrowing in for closer judgment. For the first time since arriving, he felt the boundary between survival and belonging start to take shape. Whether he crossed that boundary or broke under it was now entirely up to him. When John stepped out from the elders' circle with Taya beside him, the camp's atmosphere felt different. Warriors no longer looked at him as an unknown threat. They now watched him as someone placed under expectation. Children stared with open curiosity. A few women paused in their chores to assess him from a distance. Every eye carried evaluation, not hostility, yet the pressure settled on his shoulders heavier than the bindings he had worn the day before. Taya led him toward a row of storage shelters built from poles and layered hides. Smoke drifted lightly from nearby cooking fires, carrying the scent of roasted meat and dried herbs. The sun had begun its climb, casting long shadows behind them. "You work with the men today," Taya said, stopping near a pile of supplies stacked in uneven rows. "They will decide what you learn first." John nodded, trying to read the tension in her voice. She wasn't worried about whether he could handle the tasks. She was watching to see whether the tribe accepted him without forcing conflict. 4 men approached, each carrying tools or supplies. Maddo, the young warrior who had doubted John earlier, stood at the front. His expression remained unreadable, but he didn't hide his skepticism. 2 older men behind him wore calm, observant faces. The fourth was a middle-aged man with a scar across his left cheek and a quiet demeanor. Maddo pointed to a pile of long wooden poles. "These are for new drying racks," he said. "We build them near the river." He gestured to John. "You carry. You help dig. You do not give orders." John gave a short nod. "Understood." The older man with the scar spoke next. "I am Sika," he said. "I will show you what to do." Sika lifted one end of a heavy pole and glanced at John to take the other. John stepped forward, gripped the wood firmly, and lifted. The weight pressed into his palms, but he steadied it and followed as Sika began walking. The path to the river wound between tall grass and scattered bushes. The sound of rushing water grew louder as they neared the bank. When they reached the building site, the other 2 men began clearing debris while Maddo unloaded tools. Sika set down the pole and pointed to a marked area on the ground. "You dig here," he said, "deep enough so the posts do not shift." John grabbed a wooden shovel and drove it into the dirt. The soil was dry near the surface, but softer beneath. He dug with controlled pace, careful not to rush or drag the tool. Sweat formed along his forehead, but he didn't wipe it away. He focused on the rhythm of his movements, knowing the men around him were watching every detail. Maddo eventually stepped beside him. "You have done this before?" he asked. "Some," John said. "Where?" Maddo pressed. John kept digging. "Ranches, corrals, storage posts." Maddo studied his posture. "And you worked alone?" "Most of the time." "That is not our way," Maddo said. John stopped digging long enough to look at him. "I'm learning your way now." Maddo didn't respond, but his jaw tightened with a mixture of irritation and reluctant respect. Then he picked up a second shovel and worked beside John without further comment. The older man, Sika, watched them with interest. "A man who listens learns faster than a man who talks," he said quietly. Maddo shot him a look, but didn't argue. By midday, they had dug 4 deep holes and positioned the poles. Sika inspected each one, nodding with approval. The structure took shape slowly but visibly, promising a sturdy rack once the crossbars were attached. John stepped back to catch his breath. His arms ached and dirt clung to his shirt and trousers, but he didn't let exhaustion show. He noticed Maddo watching him again, not with hostility this time, but with a calculation that suggested he was reevaluating his earlier assumptions. One of the elders from the morning walked down the slope toward them. He carried a water skin and handed it first to Sika, then to Maddo, and finally to John. "You work as if you want to stay," the elder said. John drank and handed the water back carefully. "I don't want trouble." "Good," the elder replied. "Then trouble may stay away." As the elder left, Maddo approached John. His tone held no friendliness, but it carried fewer sharp edges. "You work hard," he said, "but this is one morning. The camp watches more than one morning." "I know," John said. Maddo nodded curtly. "Then keep your pace." They finished anchoring the posts, and Sika handed John a long wooden mallet. "Tap the base," he instructed. "Not too hard. Enough to tighten." John followed the instruction precisely. Sika observed the motion with quiet approval. By the time they returned to camp, the sun had begun moving west. Taya stood near the cook fires, speaking with an older woman. When she noticed John, her gaze moved from his dirt-covered hands to the tired set of his shoulders. She stepped toward him. "You worked all day," she said. He nodded. "Sika taught me well." "And Maddo?" she asked. "He didn't make it easy," John said, "but he didn't try to make me fail." Taya considered that with visible relief. He saw you work beside him, not behind him. That matters. John looked around the camp. Warriors sharpened tools. Children played near the lodge line. Women prepared evening meals. The smells of cooked meat and herbs drifted through the air. It felt like a community built on structure, cooperation, and trust, none of which came easily. Taya spoke again. Tonight we share food. You sit with us. John paused. He knew sitting with her meant more eyes studying him, more judgment, more pressure not to misstep. But refusing would insult her. I'll be there, he said. Taya nodded once, satisfied. Then you walk the right path. As she stepped away to continue her duties, John watched her with quiet awareness. He realized she had spent the entire day gauging how he handled pressure, how he worked, how he responded, how he learned. She wasn't waiting for him to fail. She was watching to see whether he could fit into a world that relied on steadiness and respect. For the first time since entering the camp, John felt the possibility, not certainty, but possibility, that his presence here might grow into something more than survival. He wiped dirt from his hands and headed toward the river to wash, preparing for whatever the evening demanded. By the time the sun dipped behind the hills, a deep orange haze settled across the camp. Smoke from the cook fires rose in thin trails, carrying the smell of roasted venison, ground corn, and simmering herbs. Families gathered around woven mats, speaking in low tones, passing bowls, and sharing stories from the day's work. The atmosphere felt calm but attentive, as if everyone sensed something new entering the rhythm of their evening. John stood at the edge of the gathering area with freshly washed hands and a tightened jaw. He had cleaned the dirt from his clothes in the river and combed his hair back as best he could. Even so, he felt out of place, like a figure drawn into a painting that had been finished long before he arrived. His chest tightened with the worry that he might step wrong, misunderstand a custom, or show an unintended disrespect. Taya approached him with a measured pace, her braids swaying slightly against her back. You sit with my family, she said. They will want to see who you are. John nodded. I'll do my best not to offend anyone. She studied his face for a moment. If you listen more than you speak, you will be fine. He allowed a faint breath of relief. Listening is something I can manage. Taya led him toward a circle of mats near her father. Chaska sat with two elders and a few younger relatives. Their posture was relaxed, but their attention was sharp, shifting toward John the moment he stepped into the firelight. Chaska motioned for him to sit. John lowered himself onto the mat beside Taya, careful not to crowd her space. A woman he hadn't met before, middle-aged with steady eyes, passed him a bowl of venison stew. He accepted it with both hands, mindful of her expression. She didn't smile, but she didn't show distrust either. Chaska spoke first. You worked with Sika today. Yes, John replied. He showed me everything I needed to do. And you learned quickly, Chaska said. John hesitated. Compliment or test? He chose honesty. I try to keep up. One of the elders let out a low hum of approval. Another leaned forward slightly. Hard work is seen, the elder said, but intention is seen more. John met his gaze. My intention is to help where I'm needed. The elders exchanged a brief look, not of suspicion, but of evaluation. The older woman beside Taya spoke next, her voice soft but clear. Your hands show labor. Your eyes show caution. A useful mix. John wasn't sure how to respond, so he inclined his head in acknowledgement. He noticed Taya observing him from the side, not with pressure, but with interest, as if she were watching how he fit into a space she had long known. As they ate, conversations unfolded around him. Children brought water skins to their elders. Warriors discussed the next hunting trip. Women shared tasks for the next day, drying meat, tanning hides, gathering plants near the river. John listened closely, learning patterns in their speech and understanding their priorities. At one point, a young warrior named Keem sat across from him. He studied John with narrowed eyes. You fought when taken? Keem asked. John swallowed a piece of meat before answering. I tried. Keem tilted his head. Why try if outnumbered? John considered the question. Because standing still only helps if you choose when to stay still. When they grabbed my friend, I didn't have time to think. Keem absorbed that with a faint nod. Choosing when to move and when not to move matters. John didn't miss the parallel to Taya's earlier comments. Their people valued discipline and intention more than strength for its own sake. As the meal continued, Taya spoke quietly near his shoulder. "You held yourself well," she said. "No fear in your eyes." "That is good." John kept his voice low. "I'm not trying to hide fear. I'm trying not to waste energy." "That is different," she replied, approving. A group of children ran past them, laughing as they circled one of the fires. Their joy contrasted sharply with John's tension, and he found himself watching them longer than he expected. Childhood had ended early for him. Seeing children who played without fear stirred something unfamiliar in his chest. Taya noticed his expression. "Children here learn strength early," she said, "but they also learn peace when they can." John nodded, understanding more of her world with each passing moment. When the meal ended, bowls were collected, and some families returned to their lodges. A few warriors remained by the fire, sharpening knives or repairing gear. Chaska stayed seated, his eyes shifting between the flames and John. Finally, the elder addressed him again. "You did well tonight," Chaska said, "but the camp will not decide your place in one day. Many will watch you. Some will doubt. Some will test you." John listened carefully. "I expect that." "Good," Chaska said. "A man who expects calm in a changing world does not last long." Sika approached from behind Chaska. "Tomorrow you work with me again," he told John. "We rebuild old storage racks and move supplies." John inclined his head. "I'll be ready." Taya stood and waited for him to rise. She gave her father a respectful nod before turning toward her lodge. John followed at her side, feeling the weight of every step. Once they were out of earshot, she spoke quietly. "You sat among them as if you had done it for years," she said. He exhaled, tension slowly easing from his shoulders. "I was concentrating every moment." "That is how most people begin," she replied. "You did not shame me." Her honesty struck him harder than expected. "I didn't want to." They reached the lodge. Taya held the flap open. "Rest," she said. "Tomorrow you show them more." John entered, feeling the fire's warmth settle into the space again. As he lay down on the blanket she prepared, he realized something had changed over the course of the evening. He was no longer seen only as the man Taya pointed at. He had become someone the tribe expected something from. And for the first time in years, expectation did not feel like a burden. John woke before the first shades of light touched the horizon. The inside of the lodge held a deep, steady quiet, broken only by the faint crackle of coals left in the fire pit. Taya still slept near the entrance, her posture relaxed for the first time since he arrived. Her calmness today told him something he hadn't fully accepted. She trusted him to remain where he belonged. He stepped outside to the cool air. The camp was still. Shadows stretched between the lodges, and smoke drifted slowly upward from dying fires. John rolled his shoulders, feeling the soreness from yesterday's work, and walked toward the river to splash cold water onto his face. The chill sharpened his senses, preparing him for another day of labor. When he returned to the main clearing, Sika was waiting with a bundle of tools. "You eat first," Sika said, handing him a piece of flatbread. "Work after." John nodded and ate quietly as more people emerged from lodges. Warriors prepared their gear, women organized tasks, and children started morning chores. The camp followed a rhythm so practiced that even someone new could feel the pattern forming around him. But something in the air shifted dangerously when Maddo appeared from the lodge line with two other young warriors behind him. Their expressions were far more severe than the day before. When Maddo noticed John, he walked straight toward him, not bothering to hide the tension in his chest. Sika stepped forward, ready to intercept, but Maddo lifted one hand. "I speak," Maddo said. "Let him answer." John stiffened. He sensed the challenge before the words even came. Maddo stopped in front of him. "3 hunters returned before dawn," he said. "They saw riders on the ridge. Settlers, armed." John's stomach tightened. He had traveled near those ridges many times and knew exactly what armed riders meant. How many? He asked. 7, Matto replied. They moved north, but not fast. They searched the ground as they rode. His eyes narrowed. They might be looking for you. A hush fell around them as others listened. John understood instantly why Matto came to him first. His presence in the camp, if discovered, could put these people at risk. Settlers seeing a white man inside an Apache community could trigger assumptions. Kidnapping, coercion, or worse. No matter how peaceful the situation was here, the outside world didn't care. Sika crossed his arms. Do these riders know you survived the raid? They might, John said. If any man escaped the attack, they'll guess someone was taken. Taya approached them quietly, her eyes fixed on John. She listened without interrupting, but the tension in her shoulders grew with every word spoken. Matto stepped closer, voice sharper now. If danger comes here, it comes because of you. John didn't flinch. I didn't bring them, but I understand the risk. Understanding isn't enough, Matto said. What will you do if they come back? If they search this valley? John paused. He could feel every gaze locked onto him. Fear wasn't what he felt. More a steady pressure to choose his next words carefully. Running would make him look guilty. Denying danger would make him look foolish. He had to give them something real. I won't let them harm this camp, John said. If they find this place, I'll step out before they reach you. Taya's expression tightened. You walk into them alone? You think that fixes anything? John didn't respond immediately. He wasn't under the illusion that approaching armed settlers would change their suspicions. But risking the tribe's safety wasn't an option. Sika placed a hand on Matto's arm. Let him explain. John drew a slow breath. Those men travel expecting conflict. If they think I was taken by force, they'll make assumptions that cause damage. If I meet them away from the camp, they might leave without trouble. And if they don't, Taya asked, then I keep them away from here, John said quietly. The honesty in his tone changed the atmosphere. Some warriors exchanged glances. Others stepped closer to listen. The idea of him facing 7 armed men alone wasn't noble. It was nearly impossible. Everyone knew that, but the willingness to do it told them something important. Chaska approached from behind the crowd, having heard enough to assess the situation. You would give yourself to strangers to protect people who did not choose you, he asked. John met his eyes. Your daughter chose me. That's enough. The statement held weight none of them expected, not even John. Taya's breath hitched quietly, though she kept her posture steady. Chaska studied him for a long moment. You think like someone who has carried loss, he said, but you also think like someone who values others more than himself. He turned to Matto. The camp watches him, but not to find failure, to see if he stands in truth. Matto didn't argue. He stepped back reluctantly, though he kept his eyes on John. Chaska looked to Sika. You take him to the high ridge today. Show him the paths. If the riders return, he must know where they move. Sika nodded. Taya stepped forward, her voice firm. I go too. Chaska shook his head. No, you stay. The camp needs your calm. Taya wanted to argue, but she swallowed her frustration. Her gaze shifted to John instead. You do not go alone with danger, she said quietly. John answered with equal steadiness. I won't do anything foolish. You already offered to walk in his 7 rifles, she replied. He didn't deny it, because he meant it. Sika motioned for John to follow. They collected water skins, packed dried meat, and gathered a pair of long knives. Though John still had no weapon of his own, Sika carried enough to protect them both if the situation turned. As they headed toward the ridge, John felt Taya's eyes on him until the camp disappeared behind a row of juniper trees. He didn't turn back, but he sensed her worry, her caution, and something quieter beneath both, an investment she hadn't spoken aloud. The climb to the ridge was steep, marked by loose rocks and narrow paths. John followed Sika's steady pace, keeping his breathing even despite the rising heat. When they reached the top, the entire valley spread out below them. Open grassland, distant ridges, and a trail of faint dust drifting far to the north, evidence of recent riders. Sika stood beside him. If those men come back, he said, you tell me first. The tribe decides together what happens next. John nodded. I don't want trouble brought here. I know, Sika said, but wanting is nothing without choice. John looked across the land again, feeling the weight of responsibility settle deeper. He had been chosen by Taya, accepted cautiously by Chaska, and tolerated by warriors who still doubted him. Danger approaching the camp put everyone at risk, especially Taya. He would not allow the peace she was building to break because of him. As the wind shifted across the ridge, John understood one thing clearly. This wasn't about survival anymore. This was about earning a place he was starting to want. By mid-afternoon, the heat settled low and heavy across the valley. John and Sika had spent hours watching the northern ridge, studying the faint marks left by the riders who passed through earlier. Dust trails faded quickly in this terrain, but certain angled cuts in the soil suggested the riders hadn't traveled with urgency. They were searching, not fleeing, scanning the land for signs they believed belonged to missing men, signs that could lead them straight to the camp. Sika crouched beside a dried patch of grass where hoof prints crossed one another. They circled twice, he said, touching the ground lightly, looking for something they expected to find. John knelt beside him. The prints were shallow, the horses moving at a walk. He could picture the riders scanning the hills, rifles slung across their backs, suspicion guiding their path. They'll return, John said. They don't give up this quickly. Sika stood slowly. Then we prepare the camp before nightfall. They descended the ridge in silence. The walk back was long, and the weight of the approaching problem pressed harder with every step. The sun slid behind scattered clouds, dulling the light and creating long shadows between the juniper clusters. John felt the tension building inside him. Not panic, but a sharp awareness of what his presence might cause. When they reached the camp, Taya was among the women sorting dried herbs near a fire. When she saw John, she rose and walked toward him with quick, controlled steps. "What did you see?" she asked. "Tracks heading north," John said. Slow pace. Searching, not traveling. Taya's jaw tightened. "So they will return?" "Yes." Maddo approached next, his expression darker than usual. "If they find this place, they will bring trouble. They will claim you were taken by force. They will attack to save a man who does not need saving." John didn't argue. He understood how the outside world worked. Settlers rarely asked questions before drawing conclusions. Chaska joined the group, his presence calming those who gathered. "We decide now," he said. "We act before the sun goes down." He pointed toward the elder's fire, and the group moved with him. The meeting circle filled quickly. Warriors, elders, and several women whose voices carried equal influence. John stood at the outer edge, not wanting to overstep, but Chaska motioned him closer. "You stand here," the leader said. "The danger follows you. You speak so we understand." John stepped forward. Every eye settled on him. Taya remained at his side, not touching him, but close enough that her presence steadied him. He explained what he and Sika found: the pacing of the horses, the repeated circling, the direction of travel. He gave specific details, careful not to exaggerate or soften anything. As he spoke, some warriors shifted their weight, judging the likelihood of conflict. When he finished, silence hung over the circle. One of the older warriors, a man named Ohan, spoke first. "If riders return, they will find us ready." "But ready for what?" asked another. "To fight? To hide? To confront settlers who believe they rescue one of their own." Murmurs followed. The complexity of the situation weighed heavily on everyone. Taya lifted her voice next. "We cannot move the whole camp for 7 riders," she said. "But we also cannot let those men see John here. Their assumptions will bring death." Maddo crosses arms. Then he goes south and draws them away. Taya stepped forward sharply. "If he walks into danger alone, he dies. That helps no one." John felt the pull of their opposing views. He understood Maddo's reasoning. Remove the spark before it lit a fire. But Taya's worry carried a deeper truth. Facing armed riders alone offered almost no chance of survival. Chaska raised his hand for quiet. "You speak of him leaving," he said, "but leaving may bring riders straight to us. They will follow any man they believe escaped." John watched the leader's expression carefully. Chaska wasn't fearful. He was calculating. Sika spoke next, his tone thoughtful. There is another way. Keep him inside the camp. Hidden. If the riders return, we meet them away from the lodges. Speak first. Explain nothing unless they ask. And if they ask about him, Matto challenged. Then we decide with our eyes open, Sika said. John studied Sika's suggestion. Hiding felt dishonest, but it reduced immediate risk. Still, he knew settlers who traveled armed. Words rarely changed their intentions. I can speak to them, John said quietly. Chaska turned to him. Why would they believe you? Because I know the way they think, John said. They'll assume anyone taken is harmed. But if I speak calmly, if I show no injury, some may reconsider. Matto scoffed. Or they shoot first. That's why I go with warriors, John said. Not alone, but not hiding. Taya stepped closer, her voice steady but sharp with feeling. You put yourself in front of rifles again? If it keeps the camp safe, John answered. Taya held his gaze for a moment that stretched too long. Something unspoken passed between them. Frustration, fear, but also respect that neither tried to hide. Chaska finally broke the silence. We do not decide now, he said. We prepare. If riders return, we meet them beyond the river. John will stand with us, not ahead of us. The camp slowly dispersed, each person moving with purpose. Preparations began immediately. Warriors checked their horses, women gathered children closer. Elders sharpened their tools and whispered among themselves. As the sun dropped lower, casting deep shadows across the clearing, Taya pulled John aside near her lodge. Her eyes held firm intensity. You speak as if you do not fear death, she said. Do you think that makes you strong? John shook his head. It makes me responsible. You are responsible for your choices, she said quietly. Not for every danger in this land, but my presence brought this one. Taya stepped closer, lowering her voice. You think too much about blame. Think about what you want to protect. Her words struck deeper than anything said in the meeting. John felt something shift in his chest, a clarity he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't just protecting a camp. He was protecting her. Taya saw the change in his expression, but didn't question it. Instead, she said, when night falls, you stay near my lodge. I want you where I can see you. John gave a slow nod. All right. The camp braced for whatever tomorrow brought. And for the first time, the fear that entered the valley was no longer just theirs. It was his too. The sun rose pale and hazy the next morning, casting a muted gold across the valley. The camp moved with quiet urgency. Fires lit earlier than usual. Warriors checking gear before anyone finished breakfast. Women guiding children to stay close to the lodge line. The calm rhythm of the previous days had tightened into a firm, watchful stillness. John woke at the sound of boots moving past the lodge. He sat up immediately, knowing the riders might return at any moment. His sleep had been light, broken by every rustling sound outside. When he stepped into the morning air, Taya stood already dressed, her braid tied tightly, her eyes sharp with concern. They were seen again, she said. Closer this time. John's mind sharpened. How many? 4, she replied. 2 stayed on the ridge. 2 rode down the slope. He understood what that meant. They were no longer searching blindly. They were tracking. Chaska gathered the warriors near the center of the camp. John joined them, standing slightly behind Sika. The leader's face held no fear, only the measured focus of someone prepared for whatever outcome arrived. We meet them at the river, Chaska said, far from the lodges, far from the children. Matto strapped a knife to his belt and looked at John. Do not step out of line, he said. I won't, John answered. They set out in a tight formation. Taya followed until Chaska turned to her. You stay, he said firmly. Your place is with the camp today. Taya hesitated. Her gaze flicked briefly to John. Their eyes met for a moment, an unspoken acknowledgement passing between them. Fear from her, determination from him, and something shared that didn't need words. Then she stepped back. John followed the warriors toward the river. The walk was silent, the tension growing heavier as they neared the water's edge. The river glimmered under the sun, its surface breaking in steady ripples against the rocks. Birds flew from the trees at the sound of approaching hooves. The riders emerged from beyond the ridge, from men on horseback, rifles slung across their backs, eyes sharp and suspicious. Their leader, a broad man with a trimmed beard, pulled his horse to a stop as soon as he spotted John standing among the Apache. "Well, I'll be damned," the man said. "We figured you were dead, Mercer." John swallowed once, then stepped forward slowly. "I'm alive," he said. "No one here harmed me." The men exchanged doubtful glances. One rider leaned in, voice raised. "You expect us to believe that?" "They spared me," John said. "They fed me. They treated my wounds." Another rider snorted. "You think we'll ride home and say you were having a fine stay out here?" Chaska stepped forward with controlled authority. "Your man is safe," he said. "No blood taken. No threat given." The leader of the riders eyed him with caution. "Doesn't matter," he said. "People at the fort are already stirred up. They think one of ours got dragged off." He pointed a finger at John. "They'll want answers." John felt the shift coming. These men wanted justification to escalate. Any sign of hostility would confirm their assumptions. So he made a choice. He walked several steps closer, stopping between the Apache warriors and the riders, standing on open ground where both sides could see him clearly. "Listen," John said. "I wasn't kidnapped. I wasn't beaten. I wasn't forced into anything. They stopped a raid and took prisoners to assess who was a threat. I wasn't. They let me live. That's the truth." The lead rider scowled. "Truth doesn't matter if people think different. It matters if you tell them different," John said. "If you say what you saw, that I'm standing here unharmed, they'll listen." The rider shook his head. "Won't trust it." "Then trust me," John said. "You've known me for years. Have I ever lied to you?" The man hesitated. That hesitation opened the ground John needed. "You tell them I chose to stay alive," John said. "That I wasn't dragged anywhere. That these people are trying to keep peace, not start a war." One of the younger riders spit into the dirt. "And if they don't believe it," John took another step forward. "Then you say you saw me walk out on my own, which I'm doing right now." He kept walking. Sika and Maddo reached for him instinctively, but he lifted a hand, signaling them to hold back. He crossed the distance until he stood at the side of the riders' horses. The leader stared at him, trying to measure whether this was courage or foolishness. John raised his voice so both sides heard. "If anyone comes looking for a fight, they'll have to go through me first. Because they aren't hiding anything. They aren't hurting anyone. They spared me when they didn't have to." For a long moment, no one moved. Wind pushed across the river, rustling the brush. The warriors remained still behind him, trusting his decision without stepping into it. The riders looked unsettled, unsure whether to argue or retreat. Finally, the lead rider exhaled through his nose. "Fine," he said. "We'll say you're alive and well. They won't like it, but they'll hear it." John nodded. "Good. That's all I ask." The riders turned their horses around. Before leaving, the leader gave John a long look. "You're walking a strange line, Mercer," he said. "Hope it doesn't break under you." John didn't answer. The riders left without drawing rifles or making threats. When they were gone, the warriors behind John relaxed slowly, tension easing from their shoulders. Maddo stepped closer, watching John with a new expression, one that held reluctant respect. "You did not lie," Maddo said. "You did not run. You faced them without fear." John shook his head. "I was afraid. I just didn't let it decide for me." Sika nodded approvingly. "Good. Fear is not weakness. Only the man who hides from it is weak." Chaska approached John next. The leader's eyes held seriousness, but also something warmer than before. "You protected us," Chaska said. "Not with fists, not with a weapon, with truth." He paused. "You chose our peace before your comfort." John lowered his gaze. "It was the right choice." "It was your choice," Chaska corrected. "And that is what makes it strong." They walked back toward the camp. When they reached the lodges, Taya stood waiting near the fire, her eyes searching John's face for injury. When she saw he was unharmed, her shoulders loosened for the first time since dawn. "You came back," she said quietly. "I said I would." She stepped closer, not touching him, but close enough that he felt the steadiness of her presence. "You stood with them," she said, "and with us. That means you stand with me." John met her gaze, feeling the truth of what they had built. Slowly, silently, through trust formed in work, choices, and shared danger. I stay because you chose me, he said. Now I choose you. Taya breathed out, calm and sure. She reached for his hand, not with hesitation, but with certainty. Chaska watched the moment from a distance, then nodded once, sealing the acceptance of the entire camp. Children ran between lodges again. Women returned to their tasks. Warriors relaxed their stances. The fear that circled the valley earlier faded into steady peace. John stood beside Taya, knowing he had found something he never expected to find, a place he was wanted, a life with purpose, and a woman whose strength matched his own silence. The camp embraced him not as a captive, but as one of them. And for the first time in many years, John felt the weight in his chest lift, because he finally belonged somewhere he chose, and somewhere that chose him back.